Hey everyone, hope you're having a fabulous day. Today I'm going to go through another game in the TCEC 17 Premier Division, and I wanted to have a look at a Leela TCEC game once again, but this time they played Komodo. This game was played on the 3rd of April, so what was that, 5 days ago. And Leela's playing white in this game, Komodo's playing black. I'm going to copy the game into the description once again. It tells you all the details about what version each engine is, but it says here that Leela's actually rated 3958 and Komodo 3912. So that's about, what, a 40-point difference? So that could prove vital in this game, especially since Leela is also playing with the white pieces. So okay, let's begin. D4 was played, this is the book moves, and we get into a King's Indian. After E4, D6, there was knight to F3, castles, and H3 was given. Knight A6, followed by bishop G5, E5, D5, and then H6, attacking the bishop, which is the end of the book. So okay, there's no way white's going to trade this bishop off, so they retreat it back, and now Komodo plays knight C5, a typical King's Indian move, attacking E4. This is quite a typical setup against D4. So white has to defend this pawn, and Leela plays knight to D2 to defend. And Komodo plays A5, another typical move here, stopping white from playing B4 and kicking the knight on C5 away. So white continued with bishop to E2, black developed, and Leela played G4. So again, typical King's Indian idea, attacking on the king's side with a pawn storm, and now white's preparing to play G5 or H4. So Komodo continued with C6. This is black's plan. They have to strike out now in the centre. And now Leela's got an option between H4 and G5. I looked at G5. Black takes. White can take. But then I think actually black gains an edge with C takes D5, C takes D5, and black can play B5 now, preparing to play B4. Sacking a pawn basically, because if bishop takes, knight takes, black can follow in with knight to D3, threatening to take on B2. But after king e2, black has another option to take knight takes f2. The point is after king takes, queen b6 check, king g2, queen takes b5. Arguably now actually black's got a better position because the white king is just so exposed. And also black's now got the open files, they can put the rooks on these two open files and start bearing down on this b2 pawn. So really g5 actually leads to a bad position for white. So for this reason, Leela plays h4. Komodo again takes on d5, and white recaptured. This time Komodo played a4, and really just sort of suffocates white's position. Stops any b4 ideas or b3 ideas, because then black will just simply take. But Leela continued her attack on the king side with g5, attacking the knight. So Komodo takes. Leela recaptures, still attacking the knight, which jumps in to h7, and now two pieces are attacking g5. In the game Leela defended this pawn, but my Stockfish 10 actually gave b4 as an interesting idea, where you're attacking the knight on c5, and black will take, and if takes, there's a trade of rooks, knight takes g5, so white gives up the pawn, but white can now play moves like queen to a7, hitting the c5 knight. If f5, bishop takes, c5, pawn takes, and then white can continue with bishop c4 with d6 discovered check ideas, which is really threatening because this rook's on the h file and the king can't hide in this corner anymore. So the engine now gave b5 in this variation, followed by knight takes b5, takes, and rook to f7. But it actually gains equality after queen a1, takes on e4, and then d6. Threatening to play bishop c4 in this position. Black can play rook f6 though, and after a check they can hide the king on f8. White can play queen takes e5, but after knight to f3, takes. In the end of all that variation, it was actually given an equal position with opposite coloured bishops and equal pawns. So I certainly think b4 was an interesting approach though. However, Leela just protected her pawn with rook g1, protecting the g5 pawn. Komodo continued with queen b8, threatening to play b5. And to stop b5, Leela just played bishop b5. There was a trade of bishops, and finally black was actually going for this knight to d3 check idea. King e2 is good for black because then knight to f4, if takes, pawn will recapture, and suddenly this bishop on g7 is just opened up on this diagonal. If knight c4 to defend, black can play queen to e8, attacking the e4 pawn, and if white goes in for this variation with knight takes d6, then queen to d7, queen to d3, and black has b5 ideas, and all of a sudden white's position is sort of collapsing here. They could play knight to b6, but then black can just gain 2 knights for the rook, and after rook ab1, queen e5, black's got a tremendous position, 2 pieces for the rook, and it's going to win the g5 pawn. So king to e2 here leads to a lost game. Leela played king f1 instead, and Komodo played the sneaky queen c8 here, threatening to play queen h3 check, which again would lead some good positions for black. For instance, if knight takes d6, black can check, and if king to e2, knight to f4 is again really good after takes, because the bishop is unleashed. And if we just go back to this check, if rook to g2 for instance, black will just perpetual check with rook g1 and queen h3 and queen h1 again. So queen c8 is a very sneaky move, trying to get a perpetual most likely. So for this reason Leela blocked it with queen to g4. Offering a trade of queens, rook a6 was played by Komodo to defend their d6 pawn, king e2, and now Komodo did play knight to f4 with check. We've looked at variations where the bishop takes this knight though, and it's not very good for white, so the king just moved to d1. The knight dropped back to d3 to attack the b2 pawn, so rook b1 defended it, and now there was a trade of queens, and Komodo put their rook on the open file. Leela now played a3, maybe to stop the retreat of the d3 knight to b4 perhaps. Bishop f8 was played to again secure this d6 pawn. However, this bishop for black is actually absolutely terrible. Again, it's blocked in by a wall of these pawns, and this g5 pawn is a really big thorn in black's side. For instance, look at this knight on h7, it's just really terrible. Play continued on with knight to c3 from Leela. Bishop g7 was played, the knight went backwards, the bishop went backwards, and the knight goes backwards again. The bishop goes back and forth, and finally we get a new move with king c2, hitting the knight, which jumps in to f4. However, this time maybe white could take this off with bishop takes f4 and e takes f4, followed by king to d3. If rook c5, then there's rook to g1, and now white's threatening to take on f4 because their g5 pawn is protected. And if bishop e5, eventually white can win the pawn with knight to c4, knight to f8, rook h1, knight to d7 and rook h4. So threatening ideas against the h-file. For instance, the knight's now threatening to take on e5 and the rooks can come bearing down. So black's forced to retreat the bishop back, which gives the opportunity for white to win the pawn on f4. After b5, maybe knight to e3, white's just a whole pawn up, and I've given this as an edge for white. However, only an edge because black still has the dark square bishop, which is now a very powerful piece. So I can see why Leela didn't want to take on f4 though, because it just unleashes the bishop for black, which white really doesn't want. So in the game, rook h1 was played, and then rook a5. The king retreats to b1, getting off the c file, and then knight to f8. And there's a lot of shuffling now. I'm just going to go through this really quickly because I don't think it offers anything. So the bishop and rooks and knight are just going back and forth in this position, as we'll see. Knight to d3, king c2. And again, this is just computer shuffling, trying to get the most ideal setup. Eventually though, after a few moves, it does end with rook c8, and here finally the shuffling ends after Leela plays the move b4, hitting the rook on a5. Komodo en passants, knight takes b3, hitting the rook, and the rook retreats to a8. Black's rook is attacking the knight, so it jumps into b5 to attack d6. Black defends the pawn, and Leela plays bishop to e3. And I think white's got a really nice setup now. They've got 3 great pawns in the centre, a nice pawn chain, and maybe the bishop is threatening to take on f4 at the opportune moment. But this rook is now really powerful. It could prepare to come into h7 at some point as well. And of course this d6 pawn is incredibly weak with the knight attacking it. So black does the best now and plays b6, maybe preparing to play knight c5. The rook went to d2, rook c4 here and rook c2, followed by rook to a4. The king went to b1 and the bishop went to f8. Now white could have played rook takes c4 if they wanted to, followed by rook takes c4, rook c2, takes. And again, I think white's got a much better position though here. Even if knight g2, the bishop can just retreat. And if the knight goes backwards, white can gain advantage with knight to d2. Let's say knight b8 and knight c4. And they're going to win this b6 pawn at some point. King d7, a4, knight to a6, and knight takes b6. White's a whole pawn up, and they've still got a really terrible bishop on f8. So white's definitely got the advantage in this variation. So rook takes c4 was definitely possible, but play continued on with bishop d2. Komodo actually took the rook on c2, the king recaptured, and Komodo checked. And the king just went back to b1. Komodo played knight to d3 here, and now we see Leela's advantage. She plays a really nice move actually, I think. Rook h8. Just a really big thorn in black's side. And white's got some tactics here. For instance, let's say black went knight to f4. Bishop b4 is a nice positional move, attacking the d6 pawn twice, and there's nothing really black can do, so black's really got to watch out for this idea of bishop b4 here. In the game, rook c8 was played, knight c1, there was an exchange again, but this only serves to help white though. Knight c5 was played, knight to a7 hitting the rook, rook a8, and now white's got a perfect position after knight c6 check. This knight is just a dominating force for white now. So king e8 was played, and all of a sudden we see what this rook does for Leela. It just pins this bishop, the king and the rook are on the back rank, and now it's just a case of getting the king into a good position and moving it up the board, followed by maybe bishop to e3. So king a2 was played. I looked at knight to d3 here for black, seeing if there's any like cheeky opportunities attacking the bishop, but then just bishop d2, if knight c5, bishop e3, knight to a4, and the king just moves up again, knight c5, takes. And the point is now white's got a pass pawn with a4, and if c4, there's king a3. And again, this bishop on f8 is still pinned, and to be honest, this position is just really good for white because he can just play a5, hold on to the pawn with the knight, and then go after this c4 pawn. So back in the game, rook a6 was played, but after bishop e3 and rook a8, it actually transposed similar to that position I just showed you with bishop takes c5, b takes c5, then king b3, c4, and here Leela actually pushed the king up to b4, c3 was played, a4, c2, and instead of trying to capture this c pawn with the king, they just played rook h1, stopping the pawn from queening, bishop e7, attacking g5, but Leela's happy to trade this pawn off, so rook c1, bishop takes, and then rook takes c2, a trade of pawns basically, king to f8, rook to e2, and bishop to c1. And now Leela just pushes this pawn up with a5. Black tries to counter with f5, but it's probably too little too late now. After king b5 and f4, black's pawn storm is just too slow. The king's coming up the board, and I think Komodo realises it's game over here. So rook f8, a6, bishop e3, a7. To be fair, the best move here was actually bishop takes a7. But after knight takes, it's still lost for black because after several more moves, there's nothing really black can do to stop this. King takes g4 and just d6. An easy win for white. And in the game, it finished with g5. White got a queen and the rook captured it. The king takes, g4 takes, and this is just not enough now. Actually, going back, Leela sacked her knight for the pawns. Just rook e1, bishop c5, and then got the king into a good position. Eventually driving the bishop back and pushing this d pawn up the board. And after g5, f3, rook f1 wins the pawn, and eventually wins another pawn, plays rook e8 and gets another queen, and here Komodo had enough and resigned the game. So there's not much to say about that game really. I think white was just more positionally superior to Komodo in this particular game and this particular King's Indian setup. Again, it's very hard to analyse these games because I think a lot of that computer shuffling had to do with a lot of tempos and trying to get in the ideal setup to unleash sort of a positional advantage. But again, Leela did this very well, and that was a nice game against Komodo. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed my analysis. Please do drop a like, comment or subscribe if you haven't already. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you're all keeping safe. And I'll see you all very soon. Maybe post a video tomorrow if I get time. Anyway, thank you for watching.